Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button. All of this because the autumn sun was already dipping below the Seattle skyline as I glanced at the clock for what felt like the 100th time. 4:37 p.m. Emily should have been home over an hour ago. I tried to quell the rising panic in my chest, reminding myself that she was probably just caught up in after-school activities or playing with friends. "She's fine, Sarah. You're overreacting," I muttered to myself, my fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the kitchen counter. But the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing minute. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Mrs. Anderson, Emily's third-grade teacher. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson." Her cheerful voice came through the speaker. "What can I do for you?" "Hi, Mrs. Anderson. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if Emily stayed late at school today. She hasn't come home yet, and I'm getting a bit worried." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could feel my heart rate accelerating. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson, but Emily left at the normal time today. She didn't have any after-school activities scheduled. Is everything all right?" The knot in my stomach twisted painfully. I'm not sure. She should have been home by now." "Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I'll keep looking." I ended the call, my hand shaking slightly as I set the phone down. Taking a deep breath, I tried to think rationally. Where else could she be? I dialed the number for her best friend Lily's mom. "Hi, Karen, it's Sarah. Is Emily over at your place by any chance?" "No, I'm afraid not. Lily came home alone today. Is everything okay?" I could hear the concern creeping into Karen's voice, mirroring my own growing fear. "I'm not sure. She hasn't come home from school. I thought maybe she went to play with Lily and forgot to tell me." "Oh, Sarah. Do you want us to come over and help look for her?" I hesitated for a moment. "No, not yet. I'm going to check a few more places first, thanks, Karen." As I hung up, I heard the front door open. My heart leaped with hope, only to crash back down as I recognized my husband David's heavy footsteps. "Sarah, I'm home," he called out. I rushed to the entryway, my face clearly betraying my distress because David's expression immediately shifted from tired to concerned. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "Emily's not home," I said, my voice cracking. "She should have been back over an hour ago. I've called her teacher and Lily's mom, but no one's seen her." David's face paled. "Okay, let's not panic. Have you checked the park or the library? You know how she loves to read." I shook my head. I was about to go look. "Can you stay here in case she comes back?" David nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll start calling some of the other parents. Go, I'll be here." I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my heart pounding in my ears. The drive to the local park was a blur, my eyes scanning every group of children, every face hoping to see my little girl's bright smile and bouncing pigtails. But Emily wasn't at the park, or the library, or the ice cream shop she loved so much. With each failed stop, the panic grew, threatening to overwhelm me. As I pulled back into our driveway, I saw David pacing on the front porch, phone pressed to his ear. "Any luck?" I called out as I got out of the car. He shook his head, ending his call. "Nothing. No one's seen her, Sarah. I think we need to call the police." The words hit me like a physical blow. Calling the police meant admitting that this was real, that our 8-year-old daughter was truly missing. I nodded numbly, following David into the house. The next hour passed in a haze of fear and disbelief. I answered the dispatcher's questions mechanically, providing details about Emily's appearance, what she was wearing, her usual route home from school. All the while, a voice in the back of my mind screamed that this couldn't be happening, that any moment now Emily would walk through the door with a sheepish grin, explaining that she'd lost track of time. But she didn't. Instead, 2 police officers arrived, their faces grave as they introduced themselves. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'm Officer Martinez, and this is my partner, Officer Chen, we understand your daughter Emily is missing. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. David squeezed my hand, taking over the conversation. Yes, she didn't come home from school today. She's never done this before. Emily knows she's supposed to come straight home. Officer Chen nodded, her pen poised over a notepad. Can you tell us the last time you saw Emily? Any details you can remember would be helpful. I closed my eyes, thinking back to that morning. I saw her at breakfast. She was excited about a science project they were starting at school. She had on her favorite blue dress with white polka dots, and her hair was in pigtails with yellow ribbons. She had her purple backpack, David added, the one with the butterfly keychain we got her for her birthday last month. The officers continued to ask questions, and we answered as best we could, but with each passing minute, the reality of the situation sank in deeper. Our little girl was out there somewhere, alone and possibly in danger. As Officer Martinez stepped outside to radio in some information, Officer Chen turned to us with a sympathetic look. We're going to do everything we can to find Emily. We'll have officers canvassing the neighborhood and checking any security cameras in the area. In the meantime, it would be helpful if you could provide us with a recent photo of Emily. I nodded, moving on autopilot to retrieve Emily's school picture from the mantel. As I handed it to Officer Chen, my fingers brushed the glass, and suddenly, the enormity of what was happening hit me full force. My knees buckled, and I would have fallen if David hadn't caught me. Oh God, David, I sobbed, clinging to him. Where is she? Where's our baby? David's arms tightened around me, and I could feel him trembling. We'll find her, Sarah. We have to believe that. We'll find her. But as the hours ticked by, with no news and no sign of Emily, that belief became harder to hold on to. Friends and neighbors arrived, offering support and joining the search parties that combed through every street, every alley, every patch of woods in our neighborhood. As midnight approached, I found myself in Emily's room, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear she'd named Mr. Snuggles. The bear's fur was damp with my tears as I pressed it to my face, breathing in the lingering scent of Emily's strawberry shampoo. Please, I whispered, my voice raw from crying. Please bring her back to us. Please let her be safe. But the empty room offered no answers, no comfort. Only the deafening silence of absence, the gaping hole where Emily should be. As I sat there, lost in a fog of fear and grief, I heard a soft knock at the door. David entered, his face haggard and eyes red-rimmed. Sarah, he said gently, kneeling beside me. The police want to talk to us again. They've finished the initial search of the area. I looked up at him, hope and dread warring in my chest. Did they find anything? The pain in David's eyes told me everything before he even spoke. No, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Nothing yet. But they're not giving up, and neither are we. I nodded, allowing David to help me to my feet. As we walked downstairs to face whatever news the police had for us, I clutched Mr. Snuggles tightly to my chest. In that moment, I made a silent vow to Emily, wherever she was. We'll find you, sweetheart. No matter how long it takes, no matter what we have to do, we'll bring you home. Little did I know then how long and painful that journey would be, or the strange and terrifying path it would lead us down. As we stepped into the living room, now a makeshift command center for the search, I couldn't have imagined that our quest to find Emily would uncover dark secrets, challenge our sanity, and ultimately change our lives forever. The first day of Emily's disappearance was ending, but our nightmare was only just beginning. 3 months, 92 days of agonizing silence, false leads, and dwindling hope. The Johnson house, once filled with Emily's laughter and the bustle of family life, had become a tomb of memories and unspoken fears. I jolted awake, heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed an accusatory 3:17 a.m. For a moment, I couldn't remember what had woken me. Then I heard it again, a soft, familiar voice drifting from downstairs. Mommy? Daddy? I froze, hardly daring to breathe. It couldn't be. My mind had to be playing tricks on me. David, I whispered, shaking my husband's shoulder. David, wake up! He stirred groggily. What is it, Sarah? Listen, I hissed, straining my ears. We sat in tense silence for what felt like an eternity. Just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined it, the voice came again, clearer this time. Mommy, Daddy, I'm scared. David bolted upright, his eyes wide with disbelief. Emily, he called out, his voice cracking. We scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over each other in our haste to get downstairs. My heart was racing, hope and fear battling for dominance in my chest. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, the living room lay before us, bathed in the soft blue glow of our Alexa device. The house was silent now. No sign of our daughter. Emily? I called out, my voice trembling. Sweetheart, are you here? Silence answered me. David moved to turn on the lights, revealing an empty room. No Emily. No intruder. Nothing out of place. I don't understand, David muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. We both heard her, didn't we? I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. It was her voice, David. I know it was. We searched the house anyway, checking every room, every closet, even places too small for an 8-year-old to hide. But Emily wasn't there. She had never been there. As we returned to the living room, defeated and confused, the Alexa device suddenly lit up again. Mommy? Daddy? Can you hear me? I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. It was Emily's voice, unmistakably, coming from the Alexa. David approached the device cautiously as if it might bite. Emily? Is that you? Daddy, I knew you'd hear me eventually. I've been trying for so long. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the couch trembling. Emily, baby, where are you? Are you okay? There was a pause, and when Emily's voice came again, it sounded distant, almost echoing. I don't know where I am, Mommy. It's dark, and I'm scared. But I found a way to talk to you through Alexa. David and I exchanged glances, a mix of hope and confusion on our faces. This was impossible, and yet... Emily, David said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. We're going to find you. Can you tell us anything about where you are? Another pause, longer this time. When Emily spoke again, her words sent a chill down my spine. There are others here. Children. We're underground, I think. In a big room with no windows. There's a man. Suddenly, the Alexa went dark, Emily's voice cutting off mid-sentence. No, I cried, lunging towards the device. Emily, come back. But there was only silence. David was already on his phone, dialing Detective Ramirez, the lead investigator on Emily's case. Detective, it's David Johnson. Something's happened. You need to come over right away. The next hour was a blur of activity. Detective Ramirez arrived with a tech team, who immediately began examining our Alexa device and all our other electronics. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Detective Ramirez said, her face grave. I know this is difficult, but I need you to walk me through exactly what happened. We recounted the events of the night, trying to remember every detail of Emily's messages. As we spoke, I could see the skepticism in the detective's eyes, though she tried to hide it. I know how it sounds, I said, my voice cracking. But it was her. I'd know my daughter's voice anywhere. Detective Ramirez nodded sympathetically. I understand, Mrs. Johnson. We're taking this very seriously. Our tech team will analyze the Alexa for any unusual activity or potential hacking. As if on cue, one of the technicians called out, Detective, you're going to want to see this. We all gathered around the computer screen where the tech was working. Lines of code scrolled by, meaningless to me, but clearly significant to the experts. There was definitely some kind of external access to the Alexa system, the tech explained. It's unlike anything I've seen before. Whoever did this has skills way beyond your average hacker. Hope flared in my chest. So it's possible? Emily could have found a way to contact us? Detective Ramirez held up a hand, urging caution. It's evidence of something unusual, Mrs. Johnson, but we can't jump to conclusions. We need to investigate further. As the night wore on into morning, more police and FBI agents arrived. Our living room became a hub of activity, with people analyzing data, making calls, and discussing theories in hushed tones. David and I sat on the couch, clutching cups of coffee that had long since gone cold. The initial adrenaline rush had worn off, leaving us exhausted and emotionally raw. What if it wasn't really her? I whispered, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me. What if someone's just cruel enough to give us false hope? David squeezed my hand. We can't think like that, Sarah. If there's even a chance it was Emily, we have to believe. We have to keep fighting. Just then, Detective Ramirez approached us, her face unreadable. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, we've completed our initial analysis. There's no doubt that your Alexa was accessed externally. We've isolated the signal and, well, it's not what we expected. What do you mean? David asked, leaning forward. Detective Ramirez took a deep breath. The signal. It didn't come from anywhere we can trace. It's as if it appeared out of thin air. Our tech experts are baffled. I felt a chill run down my spine. What does that mean for Emily? It means we're dealing with something unprecedented, she replied. We're bringing in additional experts, expanding our search parameters. If Emily is out there trying to communicate, we'll find her. As if in response to the detective's words, the Alexa suddenly lit up again. The room fell silent as Emily's voice, tinny and distant, filled the air. Mommy? Daddy? I don't have much time. The bad man is coming back. But I remembered something. There's a sign outside. I saw it when they brought me here. It says, Silver Pine Industries. Please hurry. The message cut off abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. The room erupted into action. Detective Ramirez was barking orders. Agents were on phones and computers, searching for any lead on Silver Pine Industries. Amidst the chaos, David pulled me into a tight embrace. We're going to find her, Sarah, he whispered fiercely. We're going to bring our little girl home. As I clung to my husband, hope and fear warred within me. Emily was alive. She was reaching out to us. But she was also in danger, held captive by someone she called the bad man. The sun was rising, casting a pale light through the windows. It was the dawn of a new day, but also the dawn of a new chapter in our search for Emily. Whatever lay ahead, whatever impossible obstacles we might face, we would not give up. Our daughter was out there fighting to come back to us, and we would move heaven and earth to find her. As the investigation kicked into high gear around us, I silently vowed to Emily, wherever she was, that we would unravel this mystery. We would follow every lead, no matter how strange or impossible it seemed. Little did I know then how deep this rabbit hole would go, or how it would challenge everything we thought we knew about reality itself. The journey to find Emily had taken a turn into the unknown, and there was no going back. The days following Emily's mysterious communication through Alexa were a whirlwind of activity. Our house had become a makeshift command center, with law enforcement officials, tech experts, and even paranormal investigators coming and going at all hours. David and I existed in a state of perpetual anticipation, jumping at every sound, hoping for another message from our daughter. But for 5 long days, Alexa remained stubbornly silent. On the 6th day, as I sat at the kitchen table staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee, Detective Ramirez approached me with a grim expression. Mrs. Johnson, she began, her voice gentle but firm. I need to talk to you about Silver Pine Industries. I straightened up, suddenly alert. Have you found something? She sighed, taking a seat across from me. We've hit a dead end. There's no record of any company by that name, current or defunct, in the entire state. We've expanded our search nationwide, but so far nothing. My heart sank. But Emily said she saw the sign. It has to exist. I believe you, Mrs. Johnson, Detective Ramirez said, her eyes sympathetic. But we have to consider all possibilities. Is there any chance Emily could have misheard or misremembered the name? I shook my head vehemently. No, Detective. Emily has always been very detail-oriented. If she says she saw Silver Pine Industries, then that's what she saw. Just then, David walked in, his face haggard from lack of sleep. Any news? He asked, his voice hoarse. Before I could respond, Alexa's familiar blue light illuminated, and Emily's voice filled the room. Mommy? Daddy? Are you there? We all froze for a split second before springing into action. Detective Ramirez signaled to her team as David and I rushed to the device. We're here, sweetheart, I said, my voice trembling. We're listening. I don't have much time. Emily's voice came through, sounding more distant and distorted than before. The bad man. He's doing something to the other kids. They go into a room, and when they come out, they're different. Empty. A chill ran down my spine as David asked, Emily, can you tell us anything else about where you are? Anything you see or hear? There was a pause, filled only with static. When Emily spoke again, her words sent a jolt through everyone in the room. There's a sound like a big machine. It hums all the time, and sometimes I hear trains. Suddenly, the connection cut off, leaving us in stunned silence. Detective Ramirez was already on her phone. I need a list of all industrial areas near railway lines within a 500-mile radius. Cross-reference with any reports of missing children in those areas. As the room erupted into a flurry of activity, David pulled me aside. Sarah, we need to talk, he said, his voice low and urgent. He led me to our bedroom, closing the door behind us. I've been doing some research of my own, he said, pulling out a notebook filled with scribbled notes. I think I might have found something about Silver Pine Industries. My heart leaped. What? Why didn't you tell the police? David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of his nervousness. Because it sounds crazy, Sarah, but after everything that's happened, I think we need to consider every possibility. He showed me his notes, pointing to a circled name. Silver Pine Industries doesn't exist now, but it did. In 1952. It was a small manufacturing company that went bankrupt after less than a year in business. But here's the weird part. The owner, Dr. Elias Pineworth, was involved in some kind of government research project before he started the company. I frowned trying to process this information. But David, that was over 70 years ago. How could it possibly be connected to Emily? I don't know, he admitted. But think about it, Sarah. The strange signal that our tech experts couldn't trace. Emily's voice coming through Alexa. What if we're dealing with something beyond our understanding? Something not entirely of our time? I stared at him, a mix of hope and fear swirling in my chest. It sounded impossible, the stuff of science fiction, and yet, hadn't everything about this situation been impossible from the start? What do we do with this information? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David squeezed my hand. We follow it, wherever it leads. We spent the next few hours poring over David's research, piecing together what little information we could find about Dr. Pineworth and his mysterious company. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our bedroom, Alexa's blue light suddenly flared to life once more. This time it wasn't Emily's voice that came through, but a man's, deep, gravelly, and somehow old. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the voice said, sending chills down my spine. I believe you've been looking for me. David and I exchanged shocked glances before he cautiously responded. Who is this? A low chuckle came through the speaker. I think you know, Mr. Johnson, or at least you're beginning to suspect. Dr. Elias Pineworth, at your service. My mind reeled. This couldn't be possible. Where's Emily? I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. What have you done with our daughter? Ah, young Emily, Pineworth's voice replied, a note of admiration in his tone. Such a bright child, so adaptable to the quantum fluctuations. She's quite safe, I assure you. For now. David's face hardened. What do you want? Want? My dear boy, I want what I've always wanted. To push the boundaries of science, to explore the unexplored realms of space and time. You're Emily. She's the key to something magnificent. I felt sick to my stomach. She's a child, not a lab rat. Let her go. I'm afraid I can't do that, Pineworth replied, his voice maddeningly calm. But I'll make you a deal. Find me. Find Silver Pine Industries. If you can do that, well, perhaps we can come to an arrangement. The connection cut off abruptly, leaving us in stunned silence. For a moment, neither of us moved, the weight of what had just happened settling over us like a heavy blanket. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, we both sprang into action. We need to tell Detective Ramirez, I said, already moving towards the door. David caught my arm, stopping me. Wait, Sarah. Think about this. How are we going to explain a conversation with a man who should be over 100 years old if he's even still alive? They'll think we've lost our minds. I hesitated, torn between the need to involve the authorities and the fear that they wouldn't believe us. Then what do we do? David's eyes met mine, filled with determination. We do what he said. We find Silver Pine Industries. Over the next few hours, we pored over maps, historical records, and David's notes, searching for any clue that might lead us to the long-defunct company. As the night wore on, our desperation grew. Just as we were about to give up, I noticed something in an old photograph of Dr. Pineworth standing in front of his factory. In the background, barely visible, was a water tower with a faded name on it. "David, look!" I exclaimed, pointing to the image. Millbrook. That must be the town where Silver Pine Industries was located. David's eyes lit up. Millbrook. It's a small town about 3 hours from here. It's been mostly abandoned since the 1980s when the main factory there shut down. We looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. Without a word, we began packing a bag, gathering flashlights, maps, and anything else we thought we might need. As we headed for the car, Detective Ramirez intercepted us in the driveway. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, where are you going at this hour?" I hesitated, but David stepped forward. "We received another message, Detective. We have a lead on Emily's location." Her eyes narrowed. "And you weren't going to inform us?" "We're telling you now," David said firmly. "We're heading to Millbrook. You're welcome to follow us, but we're not waiting. Every minute counts." Detective Ramirez studied us for a moment before nodding. "All right, but I'm coming with you. Whatever we find, we do this by the book." As we set off into the night, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on us. We were chasing a lead that defied logic, following the instructions of a man who shouldn't exist, in hopes of finding our daughter who had been missing for months. But as I caught David's eye in the rearview mirror, I saw my own determination reflected back at me. Whatever awaited us in Millbrook, whatever impossible truths we might uncover, we would face it together. For Emily. The drive to Millbrook was tense, filled with an uneasy silence punctuated only by the occasional crackle of Detective Ramirez's police radio. As we approached the outskirts of the abandoned town, the first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. "Turn left here," David instructed, his eyes fixed on an old map spread across his lap. The old Silver Pine Industries building should be about a mile down this road. As we drove deeper into Millbrook, the decay of the once thriving town became more apparent. Abandoned houses lined the streets, their windows dark and empty, like soulless eyes watching our progress. Weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalks, and rusted cars sat in driveways, frozen in time. "My God," Detective Ramirez muttered from the back seat. "This place is a ghost town." We rounded a corner and there it was, a massive, dilapidated factory building looming against the brightening sky. The faded letters on its side still spelled out Silver Pine Industries, though barely legible beneath years of grime and neglect. As we pulled up to the chain-link fence surrounding the property, a chill ran down my spine. "David," I whispered, gripping his arm. "Look." He followed my gaze, his breath catching, as he saw what I'd noticed. There, parked behind the building and just visible from our vantage point, was a car. A very familiar car. "That's Mr. Thompson's SUV," David said, his voice tight with disbelief. Detective Ramirez leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Your neighbor? The one you mentioned in the initial investigation?" I nodded, feeling sick to my stomach. He always seemed so friendly. Emily used to play in his yard all the time. "Stay here," Detective Ramirez ordered, her hand moving to her holstered weapon as she exited the car. "I'm going to call for backup and do a preliminary sweep." But David was already opening his door. "No way," he said firmly. "That's our daughter in there. We're coming with you." The detective looked like she wanted to argue, but something in David's expression must have changed her mind. "Fine," she conceded. "But you stay behind me, and you do exactly as I say. Understood?" We nodded, and together we approached the rusted gate. It swung open with an ominous creak, the sound echoing in the early morning stillness. As we crept towards the building, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure the others could hear it. Every shadow, every unexpected sound made me jump, imagining Emily, or worse, her captors, lurking just out of sight. We reached a side door, its lock long since rusted away. Detective Ramirez pushed it open slowly, wincing at the loud groan of its hinges. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space beyond. "This is the police. Is anyone here?" Silence answered her. We stepped inside, the beam of Detective Ramirez's flashlight cutting through the gloom. The interior of the factory was a maze of old machinery, conveyor belts frozen in place, and toppled shelving units. "Look," David whispered, pointing to the floor. In the dust, a set of fresh footprints was clearly visible, leading deeper into the building. We followed the trail, our footsteps eerily loud in the oppressive silence. The footprints led us to a heavy metal door set into the floor, a cellar entrance. Detective Ramirez knelt down, examining the padlock securing the door. "This is new," she murmured. "Recently installed." Just then, a muffled sound came from beyond the door, a voice too faint to make out the words but unmistakably human. "Emily?" I called out, unable to stop myself. "Emily, are you down there?" "Mrs. Johnson, please," Detective Ramirez hissed, but it was too late. The voice fell silent, and then we heard footsteps. Someone was coming up the stairs on the other side of the door. We scrambled back, hiding behind a large piece of machinery. As the padlock clicked open and the cellar door swung upward, a figure emerged, and even in the dim light, I recognized him immediately. Mr. Thompson, our neighbor, looked around warily, a gun clutched in his right hand. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm armed, and I'm not afraid to use this." Detective Ramirez stepped out from our hiding place, her own weapon drawn. "Police, drop your weapon, Mr. Thompson." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with determination. He raised his gun, aiming it at Detective Ramirez. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Mr. Thompson crumpled to the ground, his unfired weapon clattering across the concrete floor. Detective Ramirez staggered back, clutching her left arm where a bullet had grazed her. "Detective," I cried, rushing to her side. "Are you all right?" She nodded grimly, already moving towards the fallen Mr. Thompson. "I'm fine. Check the cellar. Go." David was already at the cellar door, yanking it open fully. "Emily," he called down into the darkness. "Emily, are you there?" A small, frightened voice answered him. "Daddy, is that really you?" My heart leapt into my throat. "Emily, we're here, sweetheart. We're coming to get you." David and I practically fell down the stairs in our haste to reach our daughter. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a large, dimly lit room. And there, huddled in a corner with several other children, was Emily. "Mommy, Daddy," she cried, running into our arms. We held her tight, tears streaming down our faces as relief washed over us in overwhelming waves. As we comforted Emily and the other children, assuring them that they were safe now, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. This was too simple. After months of searching, after the impossible messages through Alexa and the cryptic words of Dr. Pineworth, could it really end like this? My doubts were confirmed moments later when Emily looked up at us, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to go," she whispered urgently. "The bad man will be back soon." "It's okay, sweetheart," David soothed her. "The bad man can't hurt you anymore. He's gone." But Emily shook her head vehemently. "Not Mr. Thompson," she insisted. "He just watched us. The real bad man, the old man, he's the one who does the experiments. He'll be back soon." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Dr. Pineworth's words through Alexa. "David," I said, my voice shaking, "we need to get out of here. Now." Just then we heard Detective Ramirez call down from above. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson? Is everything okay down there?" "We found the children," David called back. "We're coming up now." As we ushered the frightened children up the stairs, a low humming sound began to fill the air. It started softly, but grew steadily louder, making the floor beneath our feet vibrate. "What's that noise?" Detective Ramirez asked as we emerged from the cellar. Before anyone could answer, a blinding flash of light filled the room. When my vision cleared, I gasped in shock. Standing before us was an elderly man in a lab coat, his white hair wild and his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "Ah, the Johnsons," he said, his voice the same gravelly tone we'd heard through Alexa. "I see you found my little operation. How inconvenient." Detective Ramirez raised her weapon, wincing as the movement pulled at her injured arm. "Freeze! Don't move!" But Dr. Pineworth, for I was certain now that's who this was, merely chuckled. "My dear, your weapons are useless against me. I exist between the moments of your time. But don't worry, I'm not here to harm you. I simply can't allow you to leave with the children. They're far too valuable to my research." As he spoke, I noticed a strange shimmer in the air around him, as if reality itself was bending in his presence. "What are you?" David demanded, pushing Emily behind him protectively. Pineworth's eyes gleamed with manic excitement. "I am the future, Mr. Johnson, the bridge between dimensions. And these children, especially your Emily, they're the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe itself." He took a step towards us, and the air around him seemed to ripple. "Now," he said, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality, "why don't you all come with me? I have so much to show you." As he reached out his hand, I felt a strange pull, as if my very atoms were being drawn towards him. Emily whimpered behind me, and I knew with sudden clarity that if we didn't act now, we would lose her, and ourselves, forever. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Emily's hand and bolting for the door. David scooped up another child, and Detective Ramirez herded the rest, all of us fleeing from the impossible man who defied the laws of nature. As we burst out of the factory into the early morning light, the humming sound reached a fever pitch. I dared to look back and saw the entire building shimmering like a mirage in the desert. We piled into our car and Detective Ramirez's cruiser, the children crying and clinging to each other. As we sped away from Silver Pine Industries, I watched in the rearview mirror as the factory seemed to fold in on itself, disappearing in a flash of light that left spots dancing in my vision. Emily clung to me in the back seat, her small body shaking with sobs. "It's okay, baby," I murmured, stroking her hair. "You're safe now. We've got you." But as David's eyes met mine in the mirror, I saw my own fear and uncertainty reflected back at me. We had found Emily, yes, but at what cost? And what had we unleashed in the process? As we drove away from Millbrook, leaving behind the ruins of Silver Pine Industries and the echoes of Dr. Pineworth's impossible existence, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. The mystery of what had happened to Emily, and what was still happening to those other poor children, was only beginning to unravel. And somewhere, in the spaces between moments, I was certain that Dr. Pineworth was watching, waiting for his next opportunity to continue his terrifying work. The days following our escape from Millbrook were a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and tearful reunions. Emily clung to us like a lifeline, her eyes constantly darting around as if expecting Dr. Pineworth to materialize at any moment. The other children we had rescued were similarly traumatized, their stories corroborating Emily's account of strange experiments and a man who seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was on the third day after our return that Detective Ramirez called us into the station. Her face was grim as we settled into the chairs across from her desk, Emily nestled between David and me. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," she began, her voice low and serious, "I need to talk to you about what we've uncovered. It's beyond anything I've ever encountered in my career." David leaned forward, his hand protectively on Emily's shoulder. "What is it, Detective? What have you found?" Detective Ramirez sighed, pushing a file across her desk towards us. "We've been analyzing the evidence from Silver Pine Industries, cross-referencing it with missing persons cases across the country. What we've discovered is disturbing, to say the least." I opened the file with trembling hands, gasping at what I saw. Pages upon pages of missing children reports, dating back decades, all with eerie similarities to Emily's case. "This isn't just about Emily, is it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Detective Ramirez shook her head. "No, Mrs. Johnson. We believe we've uncovered a vast underground network of child abductions, all tied to this Dr. Pineworth and his experiments." Emily whimpered softly, and I pulled her close, my heart breaking for all she had endured. "But how is this possible?" David asked, his voice strained. "Pineworth should be over 100 years old by now if he's even still alive." The detective's eyes met ours, a flicker of uncertainty in them. "That's where things get complicated. We've found records of a Dr. Elias Pineworth dating back to the 1950s, but also sightings and reports of a man matching his description throughout the decades, always in connection with missing children cases." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "And then there's the matter of the technology we found in the Silver Pine facility. Our experts are baffled. Some of it appears to be decades old, while other pieces are, they're saying it's like nothing they've ever seen before, almost futuristic." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the strange, shimmering air around Pineworth, the way he seemed to bend reality itself. "He said he existed between moments," I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. Detective Ramirez leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Mrs. Johnson, I need you to tell me everything you remember about your encounter with Pineworth. Every detail, no matter how small or impossible it might seem." For the next hour, David and I recounted every aspect of our experience in Millbrook, from the Alexa messages to the final confrontation with Pineworth. Emily, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "He made us go into a big machine," she said, her voice small but steady. "It hurt, like my whole body was being pulled apart. And then I could see things. Other places, other times. He said we were special, that we could help him travel." The room fell silent as we absorbed Emily's words. Detective Ramirez was the first to speak, her voice gentle as she addressed our daughter. "Emily, sweetie, can you tell us more about these other places you saw?" Emily's brow furrowed in concentration. "They were like here, but different. In one, the sky was green. In another, there were two suns. And in some—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "In some, everything was dark and broken. People were scared and hungry." I held Emily close, my mind reeling from the implications of her words. "Detective," I said, my voice shaking, "what does this mean? What was Pineworth doing to these children?" Detective Ramirez shook her head, looking as lost as we felt. "I don't know, Mrs. Johnson, but whatever it is, it's bigger than anything we've dealt with before. I've contacted federal authorities, and they're sending in a specialized team to take over the investigation. David's hand clenched into a fist on the armrest of his chair. And what about the other children? The ones still missing? We're doing everything we can to locate them, Detective Ramirez assured us. But with Pineworth in the wind and the Silver Pine facility gone, we're working with very little to go on. As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside the detective's office. We all turned to see a group of men in dark suits striding purposefully through the police station. Detective Ramirez stood quickly. That'll be the federal team. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'm going to have to ask you to stay here for a moment. She stepped out of the office, closing the door behind her. Through the blinds, we could see her engaged in an intense conversation with one of the suited men. Emily tugged on my sleeve, her eyes wide with fear. Mommy, are they going to take me away again? No, sweetheart, I said firmly, though my own heart was racing. We won't let anyone take you, ever. The door opened, and Detective Ramirez re-entered, followed by a tall, stern-looking man with salt and pepper hair. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Emily, Detective Ramirez said, her voice carefully neutral. This is Agent Blackwood from a specialized division of the FBI. He'd like to ask you a few questions. Agent Blackwood's piercing gaze swept over us, lingering on Emily. When he spoke, his voice was deep and authoritative. I understand you've had a unique experience with Dr. Pineworth and his operation. I need you to tell me everything, and I mean everything, no matter how impossible it might seem. For the next 2 hours, we recounted our story once again, this time with Agent Blackwood interrupting frequently to ask probing questions. His particular interest in the technology at Silver Pine and Pineworth's apparent ability to manipulate time and space was unsettling. As our account wound down, Agent Blackwood leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. What you've encountered, he said slowly, is part of something we've been tracking for decades. Dr. Pineworth isn't just a kidnapper or a mad scientist. He's a threat to the very fabric of our reality. The room fell silent as we absorbed his words. Finally, David spoke, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. What does that mean for us, for Emily? Agent Blackwood's eyes softened slightly as they fell on our daughter. It means, Mr. Johnson, that your family is now under federal protection. We'll be moving you to a secure location while we continue our investigation and search for Pineworth. But what about our lives? I protested. Our jobs? Emily's school? All of that is secondary to your safety, Agent Blackwood said firmly. Pineworth has shown a particular interest in Emily. We can't risk him trying to recapture her or any of the other children. As if to underscore his point, the lights in the office suddenly flickered. A low, familiar humming filled the air, growing in intensity with each passing second. Emily let out a terrified whimper. He's coming, she whispered. He found us. Agent Blackwood was on his feet in an instant, barking orders into a radio on his lapel. Secure the perimeter. Initiate Protocol Omega. The humming reached a fever pitch, and the air in the center of the room began to shimmer and distort. With a sound like reality itself tearing, a portal opened, and through it stepped Dr. Pineworth, looking exactly as he had in Millbrook. Ah, the Johnsons, he said, his eyes gleaming with that unsettling intensity. And Agent Blackwood, how nice to see you again. Still chasing shadows across dimensions, are we? Agent Blackwood had his weapon trained on Pineworth, but the old scientist seemed unconcerned. Your weapons are useless here, Agent. You know that as well as I do. It's over, Pineworth, Blackwood growled. We're shutting down your operation for good this time. Pineworth laughed, a chilling sound that seemed to echo from multiple points in space. Oh, my dear Agent, it's far from over. In fact, we're just getting started. He turned his gaze to Emily, who shrank back against me. You felt it, didn't you, child? The pull of other worlds, the infinite possibilities. You're the key to unlocking it all. Stay away from her, I shouted, placing myself between Pineworth and Emily. The old man's eyes narrowed. You don't understand what's at stake here. The fate of not just our world, but all worlds, hangs in the balance, and your daughter is the linchpin. Suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. Federal agents poured in, weapons drawn. Pineworth raised his hands, and the air around him began to ripple and distort. "This isn't the end," he called out as his form began to fade. "We'll meet again, in this world or another. The experiment must continue." With a final blinding flash of light, Pineworth vanished, leaving behind a room full of stunned federal agents and our terrified family. Agent Blackwood holstered his weapon, his face grim. "We need to move now. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, grab Emily. We're evacuating to a secure facility." As we were rushed out of the police station, alarms blaring and agents shouting orders, I held Emily close. Whatever lay ahead, whatever impossible dangers we faced, I knew one thing for certain. We would face it together as a family. But as we were ushered into a waiting SUV with blacked-out windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. Pineworth was still out there somewhere beyond the boundaries of our reality, and he wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. The question was, how far would we have to go to stop him, and at what cost? The safe house was a nondescript suburban home on the outskirts of a small town in Montana. To the casual observer, we might have looked like any other family moving in, but the constant presence of unmarked vehicles and agents posing as neighbors told a different story. It had been 2 weeks since our encounter with Pineworth at the police station. 2 weeks of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. Emily's nightmares had intensified, often waking us with her terrified screams. The worst part was that I wasn't sure if they were just dreams or glimpses of other realities she had seen during her captivity. On this particular morning, I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and watching Emily pick at her breakfast. David was in the living room, engrossed in a hushed conversation with Agent Blackwood. "Mommy," Emily said suddenly, her voice small and uncertain, "when can we go home?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I explain to my 8-year-old daughter that we might never go home again? That our lives had been irrevocably changed by forces we barely understood? "I don't know, sweetheart," I answered honestly, reaching out to smooth her hair. "But we're together, and that's what matters most." Just then, David walked in, his face tight with tension. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded, giving Emily a reassuring smile before following David into the next room. Agent Blackwood was there, his usually stoic face showing signs of strain. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart rate already picking up. David took a deep breath. "They found another facility, similar to Silver Pine Industries." My eyes widened. "Where?" "An abandoned missile silo in North Dakota," Agent Blackwood answered. "We received intel from one of our operatives who's been tracking Pineworth's movements across realities." The concept still made my head spin. "Did you find him, Pineworth?" Blackwood shook his head. "No, but we did find evidence of recent activity, and..." He hesitated, glancing at David. "And what?" I pressed. "We found more children," David said, his voice breaking slightly. "Kids who've been missing for years, some for decades. But Sarah, they haven't aged a day." I felt my knees go weak, and David quickly guided me to a chair. "How is that possible?" I whispered. Agent Blackwood's face was grim. "We're not entirely sure, but based on what we've gathered from Emily and the other rescued children, it seems Pineworth has found a way to manipulate time itself. These kids have been trapped in some kind of temporal stasis." My mind reeled with the implications. "Are they okay? Can they be helped?" "Physically, they appear to be fine," Blackwood replied. "Mentally, that's another story. They're disoriented, confused. Some don't even realize how much time has passed." David knelt beside me, taking my hand. "Sarah, they want us to go there. They think Emily might be able to help." I jerked my hand away, standing up abruptly. "Absolutely not. We just got her back. I won't put her in danger again." "Mrs. Johnson," Blackwood said, his voice softening slightly, "I understand your concern. But Emily has a unique connection to Pineworth's technology. She might be able to provide insights that could help us shut down his operation for good. I shook my head vehemently. She's a child, not a tool for your investigation. Sarah, David said gently, I don't like it either. But think about those other children. If Emily can help them, don't we have a responsibility to try? I was about to argue further when a small voice from the doorway stopped me cold. I want to help. We all turned to see Emily standing there, her face set in a determined expression that made her look far older than her years. Emily, sweetie, I began, but she cut me off. I saw them, Mom, when I was in the machine. I saw all those kids, trapped and scared. If I can help them, I have to try. I looked at my daughter, torn between fierce protectiveness and a growing realization that she had been changed by her experiences in ways I was only beginning to understand. Agent Blackwood knelt down to Emily's level. Are you sure about this, Emily? It could be dangerous. Emily nodded solemnly. I'm sure, but... She hesitated, looking up at David and me. I want my mom and dad to come too. I'm braver when they're with me. Blackwood stood, looking at us questioningly. David and I exchanged a long look, years of unspoken communication passing between us in seconds. Finally, I sighed. We'll do it. But we go as a family, and Emily's safety is the top priority. If at any point I feel she's in danger, we're out, no questions asked. Blackwood nodded. Agreed. We'll leave in an hour, pack light, and be prepared for anything. As we prepared for the journey, I couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. We were diving deeper into Pineworth's twisted world, and I feared we might not all make it out unscathed. The trip to North Dakota was tense, filled with briefings on what to expect and contingency plans if things went wrong. Emily sat quietly between David and me in the back of a military transport plane, her small hand clutching her ever-present stuffed animal, Mr. Snuggles. As we approached the abandoned missile silo, I gasped at the sight. The facility was massive, a relic of the Cold War now repurposed for Pineworth's nefarious experiments. A flurry of activity surrounded the main entrance with teams of agents and scientists bustling about. We were ushered inside, descending deep into the earth via a series of elevators and reinforced doors. The air grew cooler and staler with each level we descended. Finally, we reached a large circular room filled with banks of strange equipment. In the center stood a device that made my blood run cold, a larger, more elaborate version of the machine Emily had described from her captivity. Dr. Eliza Chen, the lead scientist on the case, approached us. Her eyes were kind but filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Emily, she greeted us. Thank you for coming. We've made some progress in understanding Pineworth's technology, but we're still missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. Emily stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the central machine. That's it, she whispered. That's where he sent us to other places. Dr. Chen nodded. Can you tell us more about what happened when you were in the machine, Emily? As Emily recounted her experiences, I watched the faces of the scientists and agents around us. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to awe to outright fear. And then I could see them all, Emily was saying. All the other kids, trapped in bubbles of light. They were scared and calling for help, but I couldn't reach them. Dr. Chen exchanged a significant look with Agent Blackwood. Emily, she said gently, we think we've found those children, but they're stuck. We can't seem to bring them fully back to our reality. Do you think you could help us? Emily nodded solemnly. I can try, but... She hesitated, looking up at me with worried eyes. I knelt down beside her. What is it, sweetheart? What if he's there? She whispered. What if Dr. Pineworth tries to take me again? My heart clenched at the fear in her voice. We won't let that happen, I said firmly, looking up at David and Agent Blackwood for confirmation. We'll be right here with you the whole time. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Emily, We've developed a special suit that should protect you from the worst effects of the machine, and we'll be monitoring everything closely. At the first sign of trouble, we'll pull you out immediately. As the scientists helped Emily into a child-sized version of their protective gear, I felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. My little girl, so brave in the face of the impossible. "Are you ready?" Dr. Chen asked, her hand hovering over the machine's control panel. Emily took a deep breath, squeezing my hand and David's. "I'm ready." With a nod from Agent Blackwood, Dr. Chen activated the machine. A low hum filled the air, growing in intensity until it seemed to vibrate through my very bones. Emily gasped, her eyes going wide. "I can see them," she cried. "They're right there, just beyond." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red warning lights flashed, and the machine's hum turned into a deafening roar. "What's happening?" I shouted over the noise. Dr. Chen's face had gone pale. "Something's interfering with the process. It's like something is pushing back against us from the other side." As if in response to her words, the air in the center of the room began to shimmer and distort. A familiar figure stepped through the rippling veil of reality, Dr. Elias Pineworth, his eyes blazing with manic intensity. "Did you really think you could use my own technology against me?" He sneered, his gaze fixed on Emily. "My dear child, it's time to finish what we started." Agent Blackwood and his team had their weapons trained on Pineworth, but the old scientist seemed unconcerned. With a wave of his hand, the agents were thrown back as if hit by an invisible force. "Emily!" I screamed, lunging forward to grab her. But Pineworth was faster. In a blur of motion, he snatched Emily and stepped back towards the shimmering portal. "The experiment must continue," he called out. "The fate of all realities hangs in the balance." "No!" David roared, charging towards Pineworth. But it was too late. With a final, triumphant laugh, Pineworth stepped through the portal, Emily's terrified face the last thing we saw before they vanished. The machine exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. As emergency lights flickered on, I found myself on my knees, a scream of anguish tearing from my throat. Emily was gone, taken once again by the madman who threatened not just our world, but all worlds. And this time, we had no idea how to get her back. As chaos erupted around us, David pulled me into a fierce embrace. "We'll find her," he whispered, his voice thick with determination and unshed tears. "Whatever it takes, wherever we have to go, we'll bring our daughter home." In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of Pineworth's machine and the echoes of Emily's final cry, I knew our lives had changed irrevocably. The hunt for our daughter would take us beyond the boundaries of our own reality, into a multiverse of danger and wonder, and God help anyone, in this world or any other, who stood in our way. The days following Emily's abduction blurred together in a haze of grief, anger, and desperate planning. The abandoned missile silo had become a hub of frantic activity as scientists and agents worked around the clock to decipher Pineworth's technology and find a way to reopen the portal. David and I refused to leave, sleeping on cots in a makeshift living area and spending every waking moment either assisting the research team or poring over the data ourselves. We had to find Emily, no matter the cost. It was on the 5th day that Dr. Chen burst into our room, her eyes wild with excitement. "We've had a breakthrough," she announced breathlessly. "You need to come to the lab immediately." We followed her through the winding corridors of the facility, hope and fear warring in my chest. The main laboratory was a cacophony of beeping machines and urgent voices. In the center of it all stood Agent Blackwood, his usually stoic face showing signs of cautious optimism. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," he greeted us. "We believe we've decrypted part of Pineworth's research. Dr. Chen, please explain." Dr. Chen gestured to a large screen filled with complex equations and diagrams. "We've been analyzing the energy signatures from the portal when Pineworth took Emily. We've discovered that he didn't just travel to another location. He moved through what we're calling dimensional frequencies. David leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What does that mean exactly? Think of it like radio frequencies, Dr. Chen explained. Just as there are multiple radio stations occupying different frequencies, there are multiple realities existing at different dimensional frequencies. Pineworth has found a way to tune into these frequencies and move between them. My head spun with the implications. So Emily could be in a completely different reality? Dr. Chen nodded grimly. Yes, and that's not all. Based on the data we've gathered, we believe Pineworth is collecting children from various realities, not just our own. He's building some kind of interdimensional network. But why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What could he possibly want with all these children? Agent Blackwood stepped forward, his face grave. We have a theory about that. From what we've pieced together from Pineworth's notes and the testimonies of the children we've rescued, we believe he's trying to create a network of human conduits, individuals who can naturally traverse these dimensional frequencies. And Emily? David asked, his voice tight with fear. Dr. Chen's eyes softened with sympathy. Your daughter seems to have a particularly strong affinity for this interdimensional travel. She may be key to Pineworth's entire operation. The weight of this revelation threatened to crush me. Our little girl at the center of a mad scientist's multiversal scheme. How do we get her back? I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. That's where our breakthrough comes in, Dr. Chen said, turning back to the screen. We've managed to isolate the specific frequency Pineworth used when he took Emily. We believe we can recreate the portal and follow them. Hope surged within me, but Agent Blackwood held up a cautionary hand. It's not that simple, he warned. We can open the portal, but we have no way of knowing exactly what's on the other side. It could be incredibly dangerous. I don't care, David said firmly, grasping my hand. Whatever the risk, we're going after our daughter. I nodded in agreement, squeezing David's hand. When can we leave? Dr. Chen and Agent Blackwood exchanged a look. We can have the portal ready in 48 hours, Dr. Chen said. But you need to understand the risks. There's no guarantee we'll be able to bring you back. We're not coming back without Emily, I said, my voice steel. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. We were fitted for specialized suits designed to protect us from the effects of interdimensional travel. Scientists briefed us on what little they knew about the reality we'd be entering, and we were given crash courses in self-defense and emergency medical procedures. As the hour of departure approached, I found myself standing before the rebuilt portal machine, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. David stood beside me, his jaw set in grim resolve. Dr. Chen approached us holding 2 small devices. These are interdimensional communicators, she explained, handing one to each of us. They should allow you to stay in contact with us and each other even across realities. But be warned, we don't know how reliable they'll be. Agent Blackwood joined us, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Are you absolutely sure about this? He asked one last time. David and I exchanged a look, years of shared love and determination passing between us in an instant. We're sure, we said in unison. With a nod, Agent Blackwood stepped back. Good luck, he said solemnly. Bring Emily home. Dr. Chen moved to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. The portal machine hummed to life, the air before us shimmering and distorting. Remember, Dr. Chen called out over the growing noise. The portal will destabilize quickly. Once you're through, we won't be able to reopen it from our side for at least 24 hours. You'll have to find another way back. I took a deep breath, gripping David's hand tightly. Ready? I asked. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the swirling vortex before us. For Emily, he said. For Emily, I echoed. Together we stepped into the unknown. The sensation was indescribable, like being torn apart and reassembled at the atomic level. Colors I had no names for flashed before my eyes, and I felt as if I was falling through an endless void. Then, suddenly it was over. We stumbled forward, gasping for breath, onto solid ground. As my vision cleared, I looked around in stunned disbelief. We stood in what appeared to be a vast underground cavern, but instead of rock walls, we were surrounded by pulsing, organic-looking structures that emitted a soft, bioluminescent glow. The air was thick and humid, with an odd, metallic taste. "Sarah," David whispered, his voice filled with awe and horror. "Where are we?" Before I could respond, a high-pitched whine filled the air. We turned to see the portal behind us collapse in on itself, leaving us truly alone in this alien world. "Mom? Dad?" A familiar voice called out, sending a jolt through my heart. We spun around to see Emily standing a short distance away, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked unharmed, still wearing the protective suit from the lab, but there was something different about her, a strange, ethereal quality to her movements. "Emily!" I cried, starting towards her. But David's hand on my arm stopped me. "Wait," he said, his voice tight with suspicion. "Something's not right." As if in response to his words, Emily's form flickered, like a faulty hologram. Her face split into an unnatural grin, and when she spoke again, it was with Pineworth's voice. "Ah, the Johnsons," the Emily thing said. "How predictable. I knew you'd follow us here eventually." "Where is our daughter?" David demanded, his voice shaking with rage. The false Emily laughed. A chilling sound. "Your daughter is fulfilling her destiny, Mr. Johnson. She's becoming so much more than you could ever imagine." Suddenly, the cavern around us came alive with movement. From every shadowy crevice, children emerged, dozens of them, all with the same vacant, glowing eyes. "Welcome," Pineworth's voice echoed from 100 young throats, "to the future of humanity, a network of minds spanning every reality, every possibility." As the children closed in around us, their movements unnaturally synchronized, I felt a wave of despair threaten to overwhelm me. We had come so far, risked everything, only to find ourselves trapped in Pineworth's twisted domain. But then I saw her, the real Emily, standing at the back of the crowd, her eyes clear and focused, silently mouthing something to us. "Run." In that moment, I knew that no matter how impossible the odds, no matter how alien and terrifying this world might be, we would find a way to save our daughter and stop Pineworth's insane plan. The hunt for Emily had led us beyond the boundaries of our own reality, into a nightmare realm of Pineworth's creation. But we were here now, and we would not leave without our child. And answers. As the horde of mind-controlled children advanced, David and I stood back to back, ready to face whatever horrors this new reality might throw at us. Our quest to save Emily had only just begun, and the true nature of Pineworth's interdimensional experiment was about to be revealed. The cavern erupted into chaos as David and I sprang into action. Years of parental instinct, coupled with our crash course in self-defense, kicked in as we fought our way through the crowd of mind-controlled children. My heart ached with every small body we had to push aside, but I kept my eyes fixed on Emily, our Emily, at the back of the throng. "Emily," I shouted over the din, "we're coming." Her eyes, wide with fear and hope, locked onto mine. She was trying to move towards us, but the sea of bodies between us seemed impenetrable. Suddenly, a familiar voice crackled through the communicator on my wrist. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, can you hear me?" It was Dr. Chen, her voice distorted but unmistakable. "We hear you," David yelled as he fended off a group of eerily synchronized children. "We've found Emily, but we're surrounded." "Listen carefully," Dr. Chen's voice came through, punctuated by bursts of static. "The reality you're in is unstable. Pineworth's experiments have weakened the dimensional barriers. You need to find the central hub of his operation and shut it down, or both our worlds could collapse." As if to emphasize her point, the cavern shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in the bioluminescent walls, oozing a strange, glowing liquid. "How do we find it?" I asked, ducking under the grasping hands of a young boy who couldn't have been more than 6. "Look for energy surges," Dr. Chen replied. "Your suits should be able to detect them, but hurry. Our calculations show you have less than 3 hours before total dimensional collapse. The communication cut off abruptly, leaving us once again alone in the alien cacophony. "David," I called out, pointing to a pulsing section of the cavern wall. "There?" He nodded, understanding immediately. Together we fought our way towards the energy source, desperately trying to reach Emily in the process. As we neared the pulsing wall, it suddenly split open, revealing a hidden passage. Without hesitation, we plunged through, pulling Emily with us just as the opening sealed shut behind us. For a moment, we stood in stunned silence, holding Emily tightly between us. Then all at once, the emotions of the past days came crashing down. "Oh, Emily," I sobbed, covering her face with kisses. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Emily shook her head, her own tears flowing freely. "I'm okay, Mom. I knew you'd come. I tried so hard to reach you." David knelt down, his eyes searching Emily's face. "Sweetheart, what did Pineworth do to you? What is all this?" Emily's expression grew serious, far too mature for her 8 years. "He's trying to connect all the realities, Dad. He says it's the only way to save everyone, but it's wrong. It hurts." Before we could question her further, the passage around us lit up with pulsing energy. A voice, seeming to come from the walls themselves, filled the air. The Johnsons reunited at last. Pineworth's tone was mocking, tinged with a hint of madness. "How touching! But I'm afraid you're too late to stop what's already in motion." "Show yourself, Pineworth!" David shouted, his fists clenched in rage. A chilling laugh echoed through the passage. "Oh, I'm everywhere, Mr. Johnson. In every child I've connected, in every reality I've touched. I've become something far beyond your comprehension." The walls of the passage began to shift and morph, revealing glimpses of other realities, some familiar, others utterly alien. In each, we saw children connected to strange machines, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light we'd seen in the cavern. "You're insane," I breathed, holding Emily closer. "You're destroying countless lives, countless worlds." "I'm saving them." Pineworth's voice rose to a fevered pitch. "Can't you see? The multiverse is dying, realities collapsing one by one. My network is the only thing holding it all together." Emily suddenly spoke up, her voice small but firm. "You're wrong, Dr. Pineworth, I've seen it. Your network isn't saving anything. It's making everything worse." The passage shuddered violently, and Pineworth's voice took on a dangerous edge. "You ungrateful child. After everything I've shown you, everything I've given you, you dare to question me?" "Emily," David said urgently, "do you know how to stop this?" She nodded, her face set with determination. "The hub. It's at the center of everything. If we can shut it down, it'll break his control." "Then that's where we're going," I said, checking the energy readings on my suit. "This way." We raced through the twisting passages, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp around us. Glimpses of other worlds flashed by, some beautiful, some terrifying, all in various states of chaos as Pineworth's experiment tore them apart. As we ran, Emily explained in breathless bursts what she had learned during her captivity. Pineworth had indeed found a way to connect realities, using the unique mental frequencies of children as conduits. But the process was flawed, causing more harm than good, accelerating the very collapse he claimed to be preventing. Finally, we emerged into a vast spherical chamber. At its center floated a pulsing orb of energy, connected to countless tubes and wires that stretched off into infinity. And there, suspended within the orb, was Pineworth himself, or what was left of him. His body had become a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine, tendrils of energy coursing through his translucent skin. His eyes, now glowing with the same light as the children's, fixed upon us with maniacal intensity. "Welcome," his voice boomed, no longer needing speakers to project. "Welcome to the birth of a new multiverse." "This ends now, Pineworth," David growled, stepping forward protectively. The twisted scientist laughed, the sound reverberating through our bodies. "You still don't understand. It's already done. In moments, the final connections will be made, and I will ascend to become the linchpin of all realities. Emily tugged on my sleeve, her eyes wide with urgency. Mom, Dad, I know how to stop it, but I have to go in there. She pointed at the pulsing orb. No, I cried, horrified at the thought. We just got you back. There has to be another way. There isn't, Emily said, her voice filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. I'm the only one who can disrupt the network from the inside. Pineworth made sure of that. David knelt down, grasping Emily's shoulders. Sweetheart, it's too dangerous. We'll find another way. But Emily shook her head, tears in her eyes, but determination in her voice. There's no time, Dad. I have to do this for everyone. Before we could stop her, Emily broke free from our grasp and ran towards the orb. Pineworth's laugh turned to a scream of rage as he realized what she was doing. No, you'll destroy everything. Emily turned back to us one last time, her smile brave through her tears. I love you, Mom and Dad. No matter what happens, remember that. Then she plunged into the swirling energy. The chamber erupted into blinding light and deafening noise. David and I clung to each other, helpless to do anything but watch as reality itself seemed to tear apart around us. Through the chaos, we heard Pineworth's agonized scream, saw his monstrous form beginning to disintegrate. And at the heart of it all was Emily, her small form radiating with power as she systematically undid the mad scientist's work. Emily, I screamed, my voice lost in the maelstrom. Emily, come back to us. But as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The orb of energy imploded with a thunderous crash and everything went dark. When the light returned, we found ourselves back in the missile silo laboratory, surrounded by stunned scientists and agents. The portal machine was a smoking ruin, and alarms blared from every direction. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Dr. Chen rushed towards us, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're back. But how? Her words cut off as she saw our faces, saw the empty space where Emily should have been. Oh no, she whispered. Emily. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. David's arms around me were the only thing keeping me from collapsing. Suddenly, one of the few functioning monitors began to beep urgently. Dr. Chen rushed to it, her fingers flying over the keyboard. This is impossible, she muttered. We're picking up dimensional echoes, ripples in the fabric of reality. A familiar voice crackled through the room's speakers, faint but unmistakable. Mom? Dad? Can you hear me? Emily's voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Emily! I cried out, hope and fear warring in my chest. Where are you? I'm everywhere, her voice replied, tinged with wonder and sadness. I stopped Pineworth, but I don't think I can come back. Not the way I was. David's voice shook as he asked, What do you mean, sweetheart? There was a pause filled with static and the sound of distant realities. I'm part of the network now, Emily finally said. But it's okay. I can fix what Pineworth broke. I can help all the children find their way home. Tears streamed down my face as the enormity of what had happened sank in. Our little girl, our Emily, had saved not just our world, but all worlds. But at what cost? We'll find a way to bring you back, I promised fiercely, whatever it takes. Emily's laugh, tinged with ethereal echoes, filled the room. I know you will, Mom. You and Dad never give up. But for now, I have work to do. I love you both, so much. As her voice faded away, I felt a strange mix of grief and pride. Our daughter had become something beyond our understanding, a guardian of realities. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but we would face it together, as we always had. The hunt for Emily had led us across dimensions, through terror and wonder alike. And though this chapter had ended, I knew in my heart that our story, and Emily's, was far from over. The weeks following Emily's transformation into a multi-dimensional entity were a blur of frantic research, sleepless nights, and desperate hope. The missile silo had been converted into a full-time research facility. with scientists from around the world working tirelessly to understand the nature of Emily's new existence and find a way to bring her back to us. David and I refused to leave, making the sterile facility our temporary home. We clung to every fleeting communication from Emily, each one a bittersweet reminder of what we'd lost and what we were fighting to regain. It was on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 3 months after Emily's sacrifice, that everything changed once again. I was in the makeshift cafeteria, staring blankly at a cup of lukewarm coffee, when Dr. Chen burst in, her eyes wild with excitement. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," she exclaimed, slightly out of breath. "We've had a breakthrough. You need to come to the lab immediately." Heart pounding, I followed her through the winding corridors, David joining us along the way. The main laboratory was a hive of activity, with researchers huddled around various monitors and instruments. Agent Blackwood stood at the center of it all, his usually stoic face showing signs of cautious optimism. "We've managed to isolate Emily's energy signature," he explained as we approached. "We believe we can use it to track her movements across dimensions." "What does that mean?" David asked, his voice tight with suppressed hope. "Can we bring her back?" Dr. Chen stepped forward, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Not exactly, Mr. Johnson, but we think we can open a stable portal to wherever Emily is right now. We might be able to communicate with her directly, maybe even see her." My breath caught in my throat. The possibility of seeing our daughter again, even if we couldn't touch her, was almost overwhelming. "When can we do it?" I asked, gripping David's hand tightly. "We're ready now," Dr. Chen replied. "But I need to warn you, we don't know exactly what we'll find. Emily's form, her very existence, may be different from what you remember." David and I exchanged a look, years of shared love and determination passing between us in an instant. "We understand the risks," David said firmly. "Let's do it." The next hour was a flurry of preparation. We were fitted with new, more advanced protective suits and given a crash course in interdimensional communication protocols. All the while, my heart raced with anticipation and fear. Finally, we stood before the rebuilt portal machine, its humming energy filling the air with static electricity. "Remember," Dr. Chen cautioned as she initiated the startup sequence, "this portal is for observation only. Under no circumstances are you to attempt to cross over. We don't know if your physical forms could survive in Emily's current dimension." We nodded our understanding, too overwhelmed to speak. The air before us shimmered and distorted, slowly coalescing into a swirling vortex of light and color. Through it, we could see a landscape that defied description, shifting planes of energy, cascading fractals of light, and at the center of it all, a familiar presence. "Emily?" I called out, my voice trembling. The swirling energies seemed to pause, then coalesce into a vaguely humanoid shape. When it spoke, the voice was Emily's, but layered with echoes of countless other voices. "Mom? Dad? Is that really you?" Tears streamed down my face as I reached out instinctively, only to be held back by Dr. Chen. "Yes, sweetheart, it's us. We've been trying so hard to reach you." The Emily shape pulsed with what seemed like emotion. "I've felt you," she said, her voice filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. "I've watched over you, over everyone. There's so much to see, so much to understand." "Can you come back to us?" David asked, his voice cracking with hope and fear. There was a long pause, filled only with the soft hum of energy. When Emily spoke again, her words sent a chill through my heart. I don't think I can, Dad. Not the way I was. I'm part of something so much bigger now. The fabric of reality itself." "But you're our daughter," I protested, unable to keep the anguish from my voice. "You belong with us, in our world." The Emily shape flickered, tendrils of energy reaching out as if trying to comfort us. "I'll always be your daughter, Mom. But I have a responsibility now. To all the realities, all the children Pineworth hurt, I'm the only one who can help them." As we talked, Emily explained the true scope of Pineworth's madness. He had indeed found a way to connect realities, but his method was flawed, causing untold damage to the multiverse. Emily was now working to heal those wounds, to guide the lost children back to their own dimensions. "But what about you?" David asked, his face etched with worry. "Are you happy?" The question seemed to give Emily pause. Her form shimmered, briefly taking on a more recognizable shape. Our little girl as we remembered her, but composed of pure energy. "I'm fulfilled," she said slowly. "There's so much wonder here, so much to learn and explore. But," her voice faltered for a moment, "I miss you, both of you, so much." My heart shattered anew at her words. Our brave, incredible daughter, sacrificing her own happiness for the good of countless others. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The portal flickered dangerously and Emily's form began to destabilize. "What's happening?" I cried out, looking frantically between Emily and the panicking scientists. Dr. Chen was at the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. "The portal is becoming unstable. The energy required to maintain the connection is too great." "Emily," David shouted, stepping closer to the flickering vortex despite the danger. "Emily, stay with us." But our daughter's form was already fading, her voice growing distant. "I'm sorry," she called out, her words barely audible over the chaos. "I have to go. The connection, it's hurting the fabric of reality. I love you both so much. Please, please don't forget me." "Never!" I screamed, reaching out futilely as Emily's presence vanished entirely. "We'll never forget you, Emily. We love you." With a deafening crack, the portal collapsed in on itself. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing and muffled sobs. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. The weight of what we'd learned, of what we'd lost all over again, was almost unbearable. Finally, Agent Blackwood approached us, his face grave. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," he said softly, "I'm so sorry, but we've learned something crucial from this encounter, something that might change everything." I looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes, barely able to focus. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath before continuing. "Based on the data we collected during your conversation with Emily, we believe we've pinpointed her primary energy signature. Well, it's not in another dimension at all. It's here, on Earth." David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What? How is that possible?" Dr. Chen joined us, her face a mix of excitement and trepidation. We think Emily's consciousness, her essence, might be anchored to a physical location in our world. A place where the barriers between dimensions are naturally thin." "Where?" I demanded, a desperate hope blooming in my chest despite everything we'd just experienced. Agent Blackwood and Dr. Chen exchanged a look before the agent answered. "A forest in the Pacific Northwest, an area known for strange phenomena and unexplained disappearances. Locals call it the Whisper Woods." As the implications of this revelation sank in, I felt a renewed sense of determination coursing through me. Emily might not be able to return to us as she was, but if there was even a chance of reaching her, of finding some way to bring her home, we had to take it. I looked at David, seeing the same resolve in his eyes. Without a word, we both knew what we had to do. "When do we leave for the Whisper Woods?" David asked, his voice steady despite the emotion roiling beneath the surface. Agent Blackwood nodded, understanding our determination. "We can have a team ready in 24 hours. But I need to warn you, this expedition will be dangerous. The Whisper Woods have a reputation for a reason." "We don't care about the danger," I said firmly. "Our daughter is out there, trapped between worlds. We're going to find her and bring her home, no matter what it takes." As the facility erupted into a flurry of preparation for our new mission, I clung to the memory of Emily's energy form, to the love and sacrifice in her words. Whatever awaited us in the Whisper Woods, whatever impossible challenges we might face, we would not give up. Emily had saved countless realities. Now it was our turn to save her. The Whisper Woods loomed before us, a dense wall of ancient trees shrouded in mist. Despite the morning sun, an eerie twilight seemed to reign beneath the canopy. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something otherworldly that set my nerves on edge. Our expedition team consisted of David and me, Agent Blackwood, Dr. Chen, and a handful of specially trained operatives. We were equipped with the latest in dimensional resonance technology, designed to detect and potentially interact with Emily's energy signature. As we stood at the forest's edge, I felt a mixture of hope and trepidation churning in my gut. David squeezed my hand, his face a mirror of my own emotions. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "For Emily," I whispered. "For Emily," he echoed. Agent Blackwood approached, his face grim. "Remember the protocol," he said, addressing the entire team. "We stay together. Any sign of dimensional instability, we retreat immediately. Our primary goal is to locate and establish contact with Emily's energy signature. Under no circumstances are we to attempt extraction without proper preparation." We all nodded our understanding, though my heart rebelled at the thought of finding Emily and not bringing her home. With a final check of our equipment, we plunged into the shadowy depths of the Whisper Woods. The forest seemed to close in around us as we walked, the mist thickening with each step. Sounds were muffled, and more than once I could have sworn I heard whispers just at the edge of hearing, snippets of conversation in languages I didn't recognize. After what felt like hours of trekking through the increasingly surreal landscape, Dr. Chen's equipment began to beep urgently. "I'm picking up strong dimensional resonance," she announced, her voice tight with excitement and nerves. "It's similar to Emily's signature, but different somehow, more diffuse." "Which direction?" Agent Blackwood asked, his hand hovering near his weapon. Dr. Chen pointed to a small clearing up ahead. As we approached, the air seemed to shimmer and distort, like heat waves on a summer road. "Emily," I called out, my voice trembling. "Sweetheart, are you there?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, like a radio slowly tuning in, we heard it, Emily's voice layered with echoes and static. "Mom? Dad? I can feel you. You're so close." Tears sprang to my eyes as David called out, "We're here, Emily. We've come to bring you home." The shimmering air in the clearing began to coalesce, forming a vaguely humanoid shape of swirling energy. It was reminiscent of how Emily had appeared through the portal, but somehow more substantial. "You shouldn't have come," Emily's voice said, tinged with both joy and sorrow. "It's not safe here. The barriers between worlds are so thin." As if to emphasize her point, the forest around us seemed to flicker, glimpses of other realities bleeding through. Alien landscapes, futuristic cities, primordial jungles. Dr. Chen was frantically adjusting her equipment. "The dimensional instability is increasing," she warned. "We need to stabilize the connection or risk a full breach." Agent Blackwood barked orders to his team, setting up a perimeter of devices designed to reinforce the walls of our reality. But I barely heard them, my focus entirely on the shimmering form of my daughter. "Emily," I said, stepping closer despite the warnings. "We've found a way to bring you back. Dr. Chen has developed a containment field that should be able to hold your energy signature, to give you a physical form in our world again." The Emily shape pulsed with what seemed like surprise and longing. You can do that? But what about my responsibilities, the other children, the damaged realities?" David joined me, his voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, you've done so much already. You've saved countless lives, countless worlds, but you're still our daughter. You deserve a chance at a normal life." For a long moment, Emily was silent. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I want to come home. I miss you both so much, but..." Suddenly, the clearing erupted with energy. The air tore open, revealing glimpses of other dimensions, some wondrous, some terrifying. and through these rifts poured a flood of voices. "Emily, help us! Don't leave us! You promised to guide us home!" The voices of countless children lost between worlds, crying out for Emily's help. My heart shattered as I realized the true weight of the burden our daughter had taken on. Emily's form flickered and expanded, tendrils of energy reaching out to the dimensional rifts, trying to soothe and stabilize them. "I'm sorry," she called out, her voice strained. "I can't abandon them. They need me." Dr. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "The containment field is ready. Emily, if you're going to transfer your consciousness, it has to be now. We can't hold the dimensional barriers much longer." I looked at David, seeing my own anguish reflected in his eyes. We both knew what we had to do, no matter how much it hurt. "Emily," I said, my voice breaking. "It's okay. We understand." David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud of the hero you've become." Emily's form solidified slightly, taking on a more recognizable shape. Our little girl, composed of pure energy, her eyes shining with love and sorrow. "Mom, Dad, I love you so much. I'm sorry I can't come home. Not yet. But I promise. Someday. We'll be waiting," I assured her, reaching out as if to caress her cheek, feeling a tingling warmth where my hand passed through her energy form. No matter how long it takes, the dimensional rifts were growing larger, the voices of the lost children more desperate. Emily's form began to fade as she turned her attention to them. "I have to go," she said, her voice already distant. "But I'll always be watching over you, over everyone." With a final pulse of love and regret, Emily's energy dispersed, flowing into the rifts. As she did, the tears in reality began to close, the forest stabilizing around us. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, softly at first but growing stronger, we heard it. Emily's laugh carried on the wind, echoing through the trees. And with it, a whisper. "Thank you for understanding. I love you." As the last of the dimensional energy faded, I collapsed to my knees, overcome with grief and pride. David knelt beside me, holding me close as we both wept for our brave, incredible daughter. Agent Blackwood approached cautiously. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," he said softly, "I'm so sorry. But what Emily is doing, it's saving more lives than we can possibly imagine." Dr. Chen joined us, her face a mixture of awe and sympathy. "Her energy signature has stabilized," she reported. "She's no longer bound to this location. Emily is truly free to move between dimensions now, helping where she's needed most." I nodded, unable to speak through my tears. David helped me to my feet, his arm steady around my waist. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Agent Blackwood's expression softened. "We continue our work. We study what we've learned here, and we find ways to help Emily in her mission. And maybe someday, we'll find a way to bring her home for good." As we prepared to leave the Whisper Woods, I took one last look at the clearing where we'd seen our daughter for what might be the last time. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a sense of peace and purpose. Emily was out there, a guardian of realities, a protector of lost children. And though the pain of separation was almost unbearable, I felt a fierce pride in the hero she had become. "Goodbye for now, sweetheart," I whispered to the wind. "We'll be here, always, waiting for you to find your way back to us." As we made our way out of the forest, the mist seemed to part before us, the trees standing sentinel as if acknowledging the sacrifice made within their bounds. The Whisper Woods had lived up to its name, sharing with us the bittersweet truth of our daughter's destiny. Our hunt for Emily had come to an end, but in many ways, it was just the beginning. We would continue to search for ways to help her, to perhaps one day bring her home. But for now, we had to trust in her strength, her compassion, and the love that connected us across dimensions. Emily, our little girl, had become something greater than we could have ever imagined. And though the goodbye was painful, it was tempered by the knowledge that she was out there, saving worlds, guiding lost souls, and perhaps in some small way, still watching over us. As we emerged from the Whisper Woods, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing us in warm light. And in that moment, I could have sworn I felt Emily's presence, a comforting warmth enveloping us like a final, loving embrace. Our story wasn't over. It had simply taken on a new cosmic scale. And somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the multiverse, our brave, beautiful Emily was writing her own incredible chapters.